recently posted a video in which Alan Parr is interviewing Sean McDowell, and I gave some critique of that. I ended up looking at another video in which the roles are reversed. Sean McDowell is interviewing Alan Parr about the book Alan Parr wrote called Misled: Seven Lies That Distort the Gospel. And included in those lies are progressive Christianity and doctrines of hell. I want to take a look at what Alan Parr has to say about those topics. I think this is going to be interesting. First of all, I found myself, as I was reviewing the video, tripping up at the very beginning with the whole framing that Alan Parr uses of describing these, assuming for the sake of argument that the things he's talking about are, in fact, incorrect doctrinal articulations, wrong and correct understandings of Christian doctrine. The fact that he presents them as lies I think is revealing of something of the fundamentalist mindset. And I want to show a key clip from the video, which I think illustrates this very well, and then we'll debrief it on the other side.
Mm.
The question about, spotting the doctrines that are false, the reason why it's so difficult is because most false doctrines include some level of truth that's embedded in them. I mean, any church you go to that's promoting false doctrine, normally you're never going to hear straight up total heresy from the pulpit where the pastor is saying Jesus is not God, Jesus did not rise from the dead, the Bible is just written, inspired by man. Like, we're not going to hear that stuff, but what we're going to hear is, a little bit of truth with some falsehood sprinkled in. And so that's the reason why for many Christians, it's hard to discern, because most all false doctrines are really using the scriptures out of context oftentimes. And for many people, if you're not discerning enough, it can be very difficult to spot these things.
Okay, this is, I believe, a very effective example of some of the problems with the fundamentalist mindset and some of the characteristics of the fundamentalist mindset. And there's a couple things I'm going to want to debrief here. I've said time and again, one of the key hallmarks of a fundamentalist mindset is it's very binary. It has a stark black-white distinction. So good and evil, insider, outsider, for us, against us, very oppositional, very much withdrawing from the world and drawing these sharp binary oppositions between the in-group of those within the fundamentalist community and then the out-group of anybody beyond the fundamentalist community, and then maintaining good, truth, light for everything within the community, and darkness, evil, malevolence for everything outside of the community. And you see that perfectly illustrated in the way that Alan Parr talks here. He talks about false doctrine, as he's putting it, doctrines that he disagrees with. But notably, what he says is he talks about doctrines that have a mixture of truth and error to them. Now, what's interesting to me from my perspective and mindset, what I seek to do is to build bridges. In fact, I wrote a book, The Doubter's Creed, where I talked about what I called an apologetic of agreement. But what you begin is you seek what are the touchstones, what are the common points of agreement. This is actually just standard good missiology. This is a good theology of mission. That you begin with points of contact, just like Paul does in Mars Hill. He's Acts 17, he's preaching in Mars Hill. He has a stoic, largely stoic audience. The first thing he does, he begins to quote stoic poets. Your own poets have said, in him we move, live and move and have our being. We are his offspring. I agree with that, Paul says. That's an apologetic of agreement. Can you imagine a fundamentalist going out and saying, your atheist philosopher said this, I agree, or your Buddhist teacher said this, I agree. They wouldn't do that because they have an apologetic of opposition. And that's what Alan Parr has here. So you have to have these in-group, out-group boundaries, and everything in the out-group is bad. And so when you then have what he's describing here, where you have doctrine, where there's some degree of agreement and some degree of disagreement, What you do is you apply your binary to it. Because, at face value, at first blush, the fact that you have some partial agreement with other people doesn't fit the binary because the binary is black or white, in and out, good and evil. So, how do you take it when you have some degree of agreement with another person and some degree of disagreement? Well, when you run it through the binary, as Barr does, what you end up saying is, first of all, the whole thing is tainted by the error within it that lies within it. And so you have to reject the whole thing rather than finding an apologetic of agreement at some degree of common cause and agreement with this outsider. So I've encountered this mentality for years. Way back in 2009, I wrote my economically, in terms of sales, my most successful book. Finding God in the Shack was a companion to the book The Shack. And what it sought to do was to give Christians the Shack was a very polarizing book. Some Christians loved it, some thought it was like terrible and just evil and horrible teaching. And what Finding God in the Shack wanted to do was to give people a guide to the shack so that they could find the good within it. And I got pushback from some of the people from the fundamentalist mindset that thought it was just horrible. And one of the illustrations, one of the metaphors that was thrown at me was this one that I've often heard from this mindset. It says, look, if you bake a cake, and it's a nice chocolate cake, but there's just a little bit of human poop mixed into the batter, it's going to taint the entire cake. And that's what it is in this mindset, that if there's any error within another person's doctrine, then it taints everything and you just have to throw it all out. And that fits the binary. Interestingly, I was in an interview back in 2009, and I remember it was with a Southern radio host. And he liked the shack. And I shared with him, well, I said, look, some people don't like the shack, and they say if there's some error, it corrupts the entire book, and you've got to throw it all out. And he gave the metaphor, illustration of the poop and the cake. And he had the perfect response. He said, well, Professor, it's not the way it seems to me. It seems to me that we ought to think of it as a piece of fried chicken. You eat the chicken and you leave the bone. And I said, yes, exactly. If you want a metaphor, a culinary gastronomic metaphor, that is the one you should choose. That when you partake of something else, you have a dialogue with somebody, you're understanding what their doctrine is, what their perspective is, you accept the chicken, you accept the meat, and you leave the bone. It's not a metaphor of contamination that the poop and the cake is. That's not how ideas work. Rather, you find the truth and you affirm it, just as Paul does in Mars Hill. That doesn't fit the fundamentalist binary mind. And so people like Alan Parr, when they encounter truth in other people, they have to view it as tainted and say, look, you have to reject the whole thing. Now, this comes to a related issue. Not only then do you reject the entire doctrine that the other person is sharing if you can't agree with all of it, but you also reject the person. And that's really, really important. Remember, I noted at the beginning of this video that Parr's book is about misled, is the title, and then he talks about seven lies. Why, the question is this, why doesn't he just say seven falsehoods or seven errors? Why not just say, look, these are seven areas where he believes that non-fundamentalists are in error about some particular doctrine? Well, because in the binary framework, you've got to impugn immoral motive, moral corruption to the outsiders. They can't just be wrong. And it can't just be that you've rejected the entirety of their belief for some subset of it that was an error. You've got to reject everything that they have to say. And that means impugning their character. So they're not just misled, they are deceiving you, or the devil is deceiving you through them by using them as unwitting pawns of the devil's malevolent actions. All of that lies beneath the surface of this fundamentalist mindset in which you say, okay, you're going to find truth out there in other people, but you have to keep in mind that that truth is just there to conceal the error. It's like the cake that is concealing the poop within. You don't realize it's there, but it's there. And that is the way that you retrench a fundamentalist mindset into your reading community and you inoculate them against deeper, further, more meaningful and charitable interaction with their neighbors who may indeed have some legitimate truth to share with them, which maybe may even challenge or deconstruct, dare I say, some aspect of their fundamentalist binary worldview.